So there's a lot of talk about data centers, and many people often don't understand all of the complexities involved. So I hope to supply you with a foundational understanding of many of these issues and concerns, and then provide some potential solutions to address those issues. A data center is a physical facility or building that houses groups of networked computers called servers, along with data storage infrastructure and the things that go with that. These are examples of smallish ones, but it couldn't even be just, it could even be just the size like of a small room or a house. Okay, inside that room or building, you would have your servers. A server is a computer or software program that provides data, services, or resources to other devices over a network. It can be a couple computers or rows of special computers called racks that do the actual computing and data processing work. For example, when you open a web page or your email, your computer sends a request to a server, and the server replies with the information needed, like your email. Then you'll have storage, hard drives, that hold digital files, apps, databases, things like that. You also have to have that network gear, cables, routers, and switches that link computers together and to the outside internet. So finally, we also have to have power and cooling, things like that. Heavy-duty backup generators, batteries, and possibly some simple air or water cooling systems to stop the equipment from overheating. We've had data centers for decades. Here's the first one we ever had, the ENIAC from 1949. Your mobile phone has way more capability than this entire room. But think email, Facebook, Amazon, basic Google searches, hospital systems, etc. That's the basic data center we've been using for decades. These handle text, basic images, simple requests, and searches. Okay, no big deal. That is not what we're going to be talking about today. We're not going to talk about these small and medium ones. So when I say data center, I'm meaning the ones that are going on right now. So this is where the current building boom is coming from. Here's a simple comparison for general understanding of the varied sizes, power, and complexities. Unlike those small and medium data centers, these are purpose-built for massive parallel processing, heavy machine learning and model training, and high volume uses using accelerated computing hardware, blah, blah, blah. The point is, they use different hardware, specifically these AI chips, which are tiny integrated circuits that perform the computing. And there's many more of them. AI processes trillions of pieces of information requiring continuous heavy computations to produce intelligence, if you will, and manage these deep learning life cycles. These AI chips run extremely hot because of all the work they're doing. And because of that, they need to be cooled. I'm not going to touch on the ethical or philosophical aspects of AI at all in this talk, but be aware, as you know, there are many. AI, specifically generative AI, is part of a complexity involved with these data centers and should be part of most discussions, just not this one. All right, for now, let's get some context and look at the standard residential electric bill. Electricity is measured in kilowatt hours. On this bill, you can see that we used 378 kilowatt hours during that period of time. Notice that it never tells you how much you pay for that kilowatt hour on the bill. To figure that out, you'd have to divide the energy charged by the kilowatt hours used, and in this case, you would get 13.812 cents. But the true cost also has to include the other fees that they think won't bother the consumer as much if they separate them out on the bill. Okay, it's like McDonald's charging you $5 for a hamburger and then adding fees like 50 cents for ordering it, 50 cents for handing it to you, 50 cents for recovery fees because they were shut down during COVID, you know, et cetera, et cetera. You still leave with one burger, but that burger cost you $6.50. So with this Duke bill, in actuality, the cost was just over 17 cents per kilowatt hour when all the other fees were added in. This is a look at the average residential customer's electricity use in the US. Now let's look at the energy consumption of that standard data center that we were talking about initially. Where a standard data center rack might consume roughly 7 to 10 kilowatts of power per hour, a high-density AI center routinely demands exponentially more, at 100,000 to 1,000,000 or more kilowatts per hour, and that's all day, every day. Here's what it looks on the low side. Here's what it looks on that high side. Okay? You can see this is a huge difference. And it's because there are so many more racks of these servers with these specialized AI chips demanding enormous amounts of electricity, which is why they get so hot. And because they get so hot, they need to be cooled, and the cooling takes more electricity. So most of these hyperscale systems require entirely new dedicated substations or their own power plants. As you recall, the average cost of a residential kilowatt hour here in Greenville County is about 17 cents. Well, South Carolina regulations allow commercial and industrial spaces to pay a much different rate, usually a little bit more than half of what you pay. However, if it's a really big consumer of electricity, they can, and often do, negotiate prices that bring their rates down to less than half the rate of the residential user. Okay, well, how's that affecting you, and why do you care? Well, the utility company needs to make, let's say, X amount of money, you know, some certain amount of money to stay in business, all right? That means every unit of sale, and in this case, it's a kilowatt hour, has an average cost, you know, to produce, and then they add a little more on each unit for the profit. It's important to understand, and I'll use an example. Let's say I have 100 pencils to sell, and I need to make $100 to stay in business. Well, that's an easy math problem. You're looking at $1 per pencil, okay? There's my $100. But let's say I sell 90 of them for 50 cents each, like half the usual rate, like the example of our different costs for electricity. Well, this is below cost. I only made $45 on those 90 pencils, and I have 10 pencils left to sell, and I need to get my $100 to stay in business. So you can see that I need to make up that $55 on those 10 pencils. Therefore, those remaining 10 pencils will have to go for $5.50 each. And this is how we get those increased rates for electricity use, okay? In this way, a residential user, you, are subsidizing them. You're paying more so they can pay less. What makes it worse is that this pay structure removes any incentive for these businesses to cut their use through green or renewable energy sources. So it's kind of a double screw you type of situation. Let's look at this hyperscale data center's water usage now. Large AI data centers can consume between 1 million and 5 million gallons of fresh water per day. Per day. It's huge. It's equivalent to the average daily water use of more than 61,000 people. Roughly 40% of US data centers right now, and it's changing so fast, so this stat was taken 3 weeks ago, they're located in water-stressed regions where heavy daily usage strains the local municipal water systems and aquifers. The Ogallala Aquifer in the Midwest is already compromised beyond recovery. Let's look at our aquifer here, where we get our water. It is the Piedmont and Blue Ridge Aquifer System. It spans from Alabama up through New York, but unlike many of the coastal aquifers, even here in South Carolina, that have vast underground sand layers and can replenish, this type, our type, doesn't replenish as quickly. And it's shallow, so it's very vulnerable to local droughts and these shifting weather patterns. So as of August 12th, all 46 counties here in South Carolina were still in drought conditions, okay, ranging from moderate to extreme. We have no huge data center here in Greenville, and you may think we're fine, but we share that aquifer and the aquifer that many, many other data centers are using. The Meta 1 in Forest City, North Carolina, the Meta facility in Stanton Springs, Georgia, the Valera Northmark one just next door in Spartanburg, and the same aquifer that the Morgan County, Georgia facility uses, which was made famous by AOC during a congressional hearing when she showed them the brown, undrinkable water coming out of nearby residential wells. So if you thought no data center in your town meant, no adverse effects, think again. It's taking our water. Yes, there are strides being made to use less water, like the systems they call closed-loop cooling, which use considerably less water. What they don't tell you is that these systems often require up to 40% more electricity than they're already using, okay? So in order to run the pumps and chillers and heat exchangers, they're going to be using more power. And they still need to use a lot of water to fill them, to flush them, to refill them, and all those chemicals they need to use to keep the water from growing algae or bacteria, and the chemicals to keep the water cool. Where do they go, when they flush the system? Well, we've already heard horror stories here in the US from these chemicals and metals contaminating the groundwater, or the farms and their crops, or streams and rivers. Plaintiffs in Oregon just won a large suit for damage caused to their farms from the chemical contamination. We're looking at everything from ruined crops to environmentally induced illnesses to cancer clusters and more. Chemical waste disposal is expensive, and there is no standard regulation for this yet in this industry. Okay, most communities don't consider it or think about it until it's too late. South Carolina doesn't have any laws that would force these companies to even disclose how much water they're using, let alone what's being dumped back in. That's a problem. All right, let's touch on a couple other concerns. Noise. OSHA allows for a maximum of 85 to 90 decibel average over an 8-hour period before there's any hearing loss. For a 24-hour period, that number is 70 decibels. That's for hearing loss. So depending on the distance from a data center, you're not likely to have hearing loss. But definite psychological and sleep disorders are documented due to the noise. And this is for humans. All right, what about the birds and the bees and other wildlife? Constant noise, even at 60 decibels, which is equivalent to a normal conversation, people 3 feet away from each other, is disruptive and harmful to wildlife because it masks predator movements, it disrupts mating communication, and causes chronic stress. Gonna let them know. And this forces many of the animals to abandon otherwise healthy habitats. Some recent studies coming out of Harvard now show that infra-audible sound, that's the low frequency sounds that humans can't hear, but whose vibrations can be felt at far distances through the ground, show evidence that is already adversely affecting plant life. So we're not talking just humans, not just animals and insects, plants now. And it's affecting their growth, their germination, and their future seed development. Okay, so where are we going to put these data centers? We're going to plop them in the middle of a farm, residential area, And what land can they take through eminent domain to run their transmission lines and gas lines through? Because it's already happening, all right?